Speaker, here we go again, literally. Today we are considering for the third time the FY2018 Defense Appropriations Act. The House took up and passed this bill in July. The House took up and passed this bill in September. And now we will take it up and pass it once again under a completely closed process for the third time. I know, Mr. Speaker, that many people think that the third time's the charm, but in this case, I think the third time is a farce. There are a couple of minor changes to this version of the bill. For example, once again, it has $1.18 billion to fund President Trump's request to send 3,500 more U.S. troops to Afghanistan, funding which has been attached to prior spending bills. It also has a general provision that turns off sequestration for defense spending, so it busts the budget caps but exempts itself from any consequences. That's a neat little trick, Mr. Speaker. But really, why are we wasting our time on this bill for a third time? Here's a little bit of a reality check, Mr. Speaker. Neither this defense bill nor any other appropriations bill can move until the House and Senate Republican leadership get their act together, negotiate a budget agreement that works for all our federal programs, and finally set the top line numbers for all the appropriations bills. Then and only then will our appropriators be able to begin negotiations on the final FY2018 omnibus spending bill to fund all our federal programs, defense and non-defense alike, through the rest of the fiscal year. It would have been nice if this had been done in September, Mr. Speaker, or maybe by October, or the end of November, or the end of December. One might have hoped to have finally completed the job by the end of this month. That would be 4 whole months into the fiscal year 2018. But we all know that that's not going to happen. Now, I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but I sure hope we can get this FY 2018 appropriations bills all done before we have to start working on the fiscal year 2019 appropriations bills. Now, there's a very, very simple reason why there's no budget agreement. The Republicans are squabbling among themselves over either raising the budget caps or making even deeper cuts in domestic spending. It's like the Republican right wing is fighting with the Republican extreme right wing. And I'll again remind my colleagues, as my colleague from Wyoming did, the Republicans control everything. You control the House. You control the Senate. You control the presidency. I wish you didn't. But you are in charge. It is your job to keep the lights running. But there is an incompetence that is on display here that I have never, ever seen in all my years in government. What should be happening is that the Republican leadership should be reaching out to the House and Senate Democratic leadership and negotiating a real bipartisan budget agreement, one that has votes in both chambers. What a radical idea, to actually sit down and negotiate a bipartisan agreement that will get bipartisan votes. The notion that you can present legislation on the House floor in this kind of my way or the highway approach and expect Democrats to vote for it is ludicrous. We're not going to get everything we want. We know that. We're in the minority. But our values need to be represented in these overall budget negotiations as well. So do your job. Sit down and work out a deal. That's what you're supposed to do when you're in charge. Instead, here we are entering our 5th month of fiscal year 2018 and no budget agreement, which translates into no final appropriations bills because the appropriations committees don't know what their top line spending ceiling is for any of the remaining bills, including defense. So it doesn't matter how many times you send this same bill over to the Senate. It can't come back to us as a final House-Senate conference report without a budget agreement. Do your job. And we can't get a budget agreement until the Republicans stop fighting amongst themselves and decide to work for the good of the American people and the American military. Do your job. Now, I know today that we will hear a lot about how important it is to fund our military. Of course that's important. You won't hear anybody in this House argue against that. But it's also important to fund things like the Department of Homeland Security, I mean, they help protect us here in the United States from potential terrorist attacks. It's important to fund the Justice Department. There are many anti-terrorism programs in the Justice Department that are important to protecting the citizens of this country. I mean, to suggest that somehow they don't matter, I think is just wrong. I mean, isn't it important that we support our Veterans Affairs Department, to support our veterans who have sacrificed so much for this country? To say that somehow they're not a priority? I don't think that that's right. It's important to fund the State Department. It's important to fund transportation, health and human services, agriculture, education, housing and urban development, the Energy Department, the Interior Department, and all our federal bureaus, agencies, and programs. You know, America's national security is more than just our military. It's our local law enforcement. It's our courts. It's our hospitals, our schools, our roads, our bridges. It's investing in our communities, our cities, and our towns. It's taking care of our veterans, our seniors, and our children. It's helping our local farmers, businesses, and companies survive and thrive. You know, if we fail in these duties, Mr. Speaker, then what is there left to defend? You know, time and time again, Secretary of Defense Mattis has declared that the greatest damage to our military comes from continuing to fund defense by a series of short-term continuing resolutions, one after another after another. Yet that's exactly what Republicans in Congress are doing. So please, Mr. Speaker, let's have no more crocodile tears about defense spending and how important our military is. If the military were really a priority for the Republican leadership and not just a good soundbite, then they would have reached a budget agreement and finished the FY2018 appropriation bills, all of them, last year. Mr. Speaker, right now, federal agencies, including the Pentagon, are operating under a fourth continuing resolution. And even if by some miracle a budget agreement is reached today or by next Monday, Congress will still need to pass a fifth CR by next Thursday, February 8th, because there's no way the appropriators will be able to start and finish their negotiations on a final omnibus in just a few days. So, Mr. Speaker, the bill before us, under a completely closed process, this is theater. It's not about our military. It's not about the defense of this country. It's about a soundbite. It's about trying to provide some smoke so that people don't realize that the Republicans who run this government don't know how to do their job. It's nothing more than face-saving for the most extreme members of the Republican caucus. It does nothing that hasn't been done twice before. It means nothing. It's a waste of time. Now, since the House is really only working one day this week, namely today, then we could have brought up legislation that hasn't already moved twice through the House, but for which action is desperately overdue. We could have brought up the reauthorization of our community health centers, which help more than 24 million Americans access essential health care. Or how about the reauthorization of the maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program, which helps young families all across this country? You know, the Republican leadership deliberately chose to let the authorization for each of these critical programs expire in September. They haven't even lifted a finger since to reauthorize them. Now, we could have easily taken care of their reauthorization today in a couple of hours and sent those bills over to the Senate, rather than spending the same amount of time passing the same defense bill for a third time. Mr. Speaker, defense spending and all other federal programs are in a mess today because the Republicans are incapable of running the government. It is that simple. Each day it becomes even more clear that the Republican leadership not only can't govern, they're not even interested in governing. Everything we do today, everything we're doing on this day today is going nowhere, and my Republican friends know that. But this, again, is about theater. It's not about our troops. It's not about our security. It's about giving them some cover to justify the incompetence that is on display here.